Hi, welcome to another episode of Start the Week with Wisdom. I'm your host, Bridget Burns with the University Innovation Alliance.
And I'm Doug Lederman, editor and co-founder of Inside Higher Ed.
Each week, Doug and I team up, typically to have a conversation with a third person who is typically a leader in the field, to give you a sense of perspective and optimism for the week ahead, and to also distill a bit of their wisdom. That's why we call it Start with the Week with Wisdom. This is going to be a special episode. We've been asked for more of these, where it's Doug and I kind of reacting and responding and just talking about the things that are going on right now, or what we're seeing in terms of a broad trend in higher ed. And given that it's the end of the year, this will be part one of our kind of reflection on where we're at and what we're seeing and what we should be paying attention to. So that's what we're going to do today. But Doug, as you love to talk about, Weekly Wisdom is sponsored by Mainstay, and I know you want to talk about that.
I do. Mainstay, for those of you who don't know the name yet, you may remember it as AdmitHub, but it's a student engagement and retention platform that has proven its efficacy through peer-reviewed research, which distinguishes it from a lot of companies, a lot of ed tech companies and other companies that serve higher ed. It's got really strong data-driven reports that show how it helped Georgia State University, which it has done a lot of work with, reduce summer melt by almost a fifth, 21%, and another where it helped Georgia State retain 1,200 students. And encourage you to check out the research and check out what Mainstay does at mainstay.com.
So, awesome. Well, so I want to start off by Doug and I actually got a chance to hang out in person this week. So we got a chance to huddle and chat about what's going on. And but the last time I'd seen you was at APLU in person. And I know that we had planned in our last of these shows to reflect on what we saw. But I think since then, you've had a variety of opportunities to talk to more college presidents, myself as well. And we also had a great conversation with Ruth Watkins from Strata that touched on, I think, kind of what we're seeing. And so this is going to be our space to unpack it. So I'll just lead off with Doug, as a journalist who's been working in higher ed for, I don't know, like 100 years. Is it
something like that? Yeah.
Like that?
Pretty close.
Your job is
look at the white.
No. Yeah. So what are the broad themes that, I feel like there's a few consistent drum beats that you're picking up right now. And I just want to hear from you, because I know that part of your job as a journalist is to see it and to report on it. But also I think you're synthesizing for us and you're giving us, what's the dashboard need to say right now?
No, it's a good question. I mean, there's a handful of things, and the one the things that we're paying the most attention to are probably the financial state of institutions, and the steady drumbeat of closures and other things. But that's really that's occupying a lot of our time. We're obviously paying a ton of attention to the political machinations surrounding higher education. I guess what's at the core of the most fundamental sort of thing that I've been thinking about and wrestling with, and these things are related, is the sort of increased public questioning of how well higher education institutions collectively, particularly, are meeting the country's needs, the needs of the country and of individuals. And that's obviously a very complex set of questions. But the way I've been thinking about it the most is there's no question we're seeing increasing doubts and harder questions being asked. And that's just the reality. And that's not going to change. There's no going back from that. I think, some of it's in terms of formal accountability from government entities. Some of it's just people voting with their feet and either not enrolling or starting to, or so So I guess the big question to me that I'm thinking a lot about, and it's reflected here and there in our news coverage, but it's much more fundamental than that, is how much are people within higher education understanding that there's a problem, or that there is uh, real doubt about whether how well colleges are meeting the needs of meeting today's needs. And so one of it is sort of about recognition, and I think there is some recognition, but there's also a lot of, we just need to tell our story better, which there's a piece of telling the story better that's true. That is something that higher ed could do a lot better at. But there are also things that institutions need to do differently, because, again, not because what they do now wasn't good or isn't still good, but the big question is it doing what we the people need today? And I think that is the part, figuring out how institutions can sort of understand what is being asked of them today, and then adapting to do some of those things better or differently. That's the big job. And the trickiest thing for me is that that's something that's some of those things are things institutions can do on their own, but some of it is somewhat systemic. And we have a problem in higher education that it's very difficult to get systemic movement in what is a non-system of higher education. Maybe it's an ecosystem. It's probably meets the definition of an ecosystem, but it's also just like a constellation of mostly independent entities. And so figuring out kind of what can be done collectively and how. So anyway, it's a lot more questions than answers, but that's kind of where my head is right now.
Yeah, and I picked that up as the topic when we were at APLU, that I heard about some of the sessions and saw some of the after effects where people were pretty surprised by the just sense that, well, we really don't have a solution here. And I was just listening to what you're saying. A few things. One is I want to say that listening to a criticism does not validate the criticism. And I think that we, again, we're not a collective, but higher ed seems to act like listening to the public's criticism makes it true, or it somehow like, and so, what I would suggest is listening is very helpful. Any industry that has been successful navigating over time, evolving in terms of industries, if you think about entrepreneurs, like the North Star is be obsessed with your customer. Be obsessed with genuine curiosity, not judging them. And that's how you create products, services, and solutions that actually meet their needs. Me running a network, I'd be obsessed with my members. And, that means that they will likely at time have feedback about my work that maybe I disagree with, right? But I should be curious. And that's the thing I just pick up, is the lack of curiosity, the lack of, sometimes it's even a lack of listening, but it is a reactionary nature. It is a defensiveness. And while I understand that, because what higher ed does is too important to be misunderstood, especially because of the role
or dismissed as terrible or unimportant or to be avoided. And that's, but I agree with you. That doesn't mean that there's even people who are doing that. Again, you can not necessarily agree with them, but you can't really afford not to hear what they're saying.
Yeah. And so for me, I'm always, my bias is around just like, I run a collaborative. So I believe there should be more collaboration in higher ed. I really think that the individual institutions being obsessed with the boundaries of their own campuses, like, I think it's not helpful. I think it prevents us from actually accomplishing really big things that could change the world. And I think we have a lot of tinkering in silos and repetitive mistakes and all that, blah, blah, blah. That's from how I look at the world. This is a space where I see it most of all, is that the response to public sentiment about higher ed, no matter where it comes from, is typically it is broad feedback about what is being offered, is broad feedback that is communicating information from an audience about what my needs are. If you can tap into curiosity, that's what they are communicating, what I ask for, what I need, what I value. And if you really want to create things that resonate, you have to listen to the language, and you have to actually like use the language and like be, that's what designers do. And what I hear is, nuh-uh, just nuh-uh, not true. And more than anything, the response, if it's a, higher ed, blah, 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 whatever the negative thing is, the response is always individual institution leaders saying, no, our graduates do great. And that is not responsive. It doesn't demonstrate the listening. It doesn't demonstrate that we've actually even heard. And, when I am talking about innovation, on stage, the thing I talked about is like this generation. And by that, I mean any person alive today who you want to serve to go to college or whatever, they are the most sensitive to bad design of any prior generation because of the proliferation of user-centered design and design thinking. So we have a lot of examples of things that work and are really effective and seamless and intuitive, and we love that. And so if you are alive today, you know what that experience is like, and you are going to mentally compare higher ed to that. And so when you come in and you get look to your left, look to your right, and you have that mindset, like, so I'm trying to coach institutions about, we really do, empathy is the first step of design. That's how you create great things. So this all connects to what you're saying in terms of, if we're not listening, if we're not willing to even to not be curious, and if we're defensive and we're all repeating the exact same thing, this cacophony of, no, my students do great. It's where I feel like there's like a escalation in the fervor. There's just like it's getting more intense because you have someone who is communicating a need, which is really not a criticism of higher ed. I think it is society's needs have changed, that the people no longer believe in the American dream. Higher ed is the talent activator for the American dream. And so they're really saying their criticism is about, these things are now needed in order to compete in the workforce. And if I want a gateway to the middle class, or if I want social mobility, or these, like I think they're being voiced as criticisms of higher ed, badges, certificates, skill, whatever. Again, it's feedback about what people need now, and it's information about them. And higher ed takes it as a criticism. And I just think we close our ears and we completely shut off any curiosity. And if we would just not do that, and we did it as a group, we would actually have a great
No, I think I think that because I think the sort of cycle that you're talking about can only make it worse. If the cycle is, here's some feedback from, and the response is, talk to the hand, we're doing fine. The thing and this is, I agree with you what you said about the sort of collective nature of it, and because most of the criticism isn't of specific institutions, it is of the opportunity being provided or not by the whole. And that's where that idea of, oh, my graduates are doing great. Well, what about the people who your institution and many institutions, if not most institutions, are ignoring or not serving well? And the thing that probably worries me the most right now is that I think I'm definitely seeing evidence that states, and to some extent even some people in the federal government, and certainly plenty of funders out there, are increasingly questioning whether higher ed whether it continues to be what it has purported to be, self-purported to be, the best way for people from with not a lot to change their lives. And I think we're starting to see, and again, some of it's obviously mostly signaling in the sort of changes that states are making in who they hire and whether they have degree requirements. But I think it's more than that. It's in some of the things they're funding and who they're looking to to be the pipeline to the workforce for for people from low income backgrounds, and so I think there is risk that the non-responsiveness leads to actual people questioning and potentially walking away from higher ed. And it doesn't, as you said it, I don't think it has to be that way. I gave a talk yesterday to a group of higher ed association people, and essentially the takeaway point I tried to leave them with is that I think higher ed has done itself a disservice by letting others define the ways in which the institutions are falling short, and as opposed to a group of institutions, ideally looking at what their mission ought to be today, how they're up their historical mission, which remains in many ways the right mission even for today, but it's different in this moment because every moment is a little different. But collectively saying, this is what we, the undersigned institutions, are try to do for our learners and for the country. This is how we're going to measure our progress on achieving those things. Have at it, as opposed to letting this politician here, that foundation there define what it wants. I think there's been higher ed has created a vacuum by not explaining and defining for itself how it wants to be held accountable. And we are in an era of accountability, and that's not going to end. So I think there's an opportunity for institutions collectively to come together and say, this is how we want to be judged, and watch us progress. And that's I think about that. That is a lot of what your organization has done and your members have done in the areas that they've worked. But I think it can be expanded and broadened.
So I am, I don't know, am I a sycophant? I'm like fangirl number one for higher ed. So I'm biased. I know my bias, right? Like I believe these institutions literally change lives. I am sold. Every time I go to the campus, I'm like electric when I leave, like just activated by seeing the stuff that's actually happening. It's so cool. There's too much cool stuff that's happening, and it's hard to distill in a conversational talking point always. But what on that era of accountability piece, I think it's really interesting that you're hearing, what I hear from you is that states are now shifting who they consider responsive to workforce needs. And I think that while I have lots of examples in my head of things my campuses are doing that are actually like direct workforce stuff or working with public policymakers, broadly, I agree with you on that trend, because I think what it is a reaction, not to whether or not higher ed is the right actor. It is a reaction to it is being non-responsive and showing an unwillingness to listen and be obsessed. Like when I, as a policymaker, communicate that the people who I talk to on the street, they mainly care. They can't buy houses. There is more class tension than there has been in a really long time. People really are frustrated with wealth inequality and income inequality and all these things, right? And then you got all kinds of stuff going on. And then you have things like the hearing this week, where higher ed, I will say, beyond the substance of what it was about, the physical posture message was, I don't have to respond to you. Like, I don't work for you, right? Like that like somehow above criticism is it's just not a good look. And so I think that it's entirely possible that policymakers, when they are getting feedback about what everyday Americans care about, and then they get their knee-jerk response from a sector is, nuh-uh, my graduates do good individually, and there's not like a collective sense of leadership. Like, this is the stuff I talk about. I feel like my newsletter's been building to this, which is like the need for actual industry leadership, not just posturing for the market share. Like if you get the microphone, like we need real leadership here, but also this conflation of feedback about higher ed that's really about the public has different needs in the future of AI. Like is worried about different things and it's looking for something different. And so you telling me how your graduates are great is actually not responsive. And yes, higher ed actually is the gateway to middle class, to social mobility, all those things. But we should still open our ears and listen, because it's actually feedback about the way that we are being perceived, and that the public has different needs that are evolving, and they deserve our entrepreneurial kind of attention and energy. And I think policymakers would respond to that. They would not need to go elsewhere.
I think that's right. And what I say this a lot, and I get some pushback sometimes, because people who are on the ground, I know that there are times where college leaders and others just feel like they're getting the shit kicked out of them all the time, and I get it. But I actually think I think we have a very forgiving and understanding public in general, and one that starts with a deep well of confidence in what in the roles that institutions have historically played. Like, this is not despite, and again, that hearing this week in DC, it was hard not to feel the enmity toward the institutions. But like, most people still believe in higher ed. And I think actually there's still a lot of evidence out there that the institutions are doing. I mean, obviously you said it from what you see on the ground, but institutions are a lot of ways better than they've been before. They're doing lots of great things, but the needs are changing. And I think the disinclination what I think the public really wants to see is recognition that they can be better, and then work to make progress. Like, if there's progress, I think that's what people want to see, is acknowledgement that of a need to get better, and then efforts to get better and deliver more. And like, that's going to be, I think that would be enough for most of the critics out there.
Yeah. I think
and I think it's that lack of recognition that is the fundamental problem in certain ways.
And when you ask about you talk about the era of accountability, this is one of the things I say, again, like, the cornerstone of my work is higher ed was never designed around students. It was designed around faculty originally, but today it is more designed. There's no design, and it's haphazard response to whatever new requests coming in from the outside. People don't have time to work on their work. They don't have time to think about, new reports to the state board, to this system, to this. Like, there's so much more that we're trying to be accountable about. And I don't think that I think there's an array of outstanding things that we're contributing, but not all of it matters to the person listening at once. And it's not helpful when we are asked for, how should we judge you? We need to synthesize all of the things, but and talk in a conversational way. But I also think oftentimes you're getting that defensive trigger. You're getting let me tell you the list of things that we do, when it's really like, I need to listen to where you're coming from before I can give you a response that will actually solve your problem. So it's like, is it that you want that the American dream is not a illusion for most of the people in my state? Got it. You know what I need to do that? I need to actually look at all of our data, but I also, like, this is the thing I've been thinking about lately, is we need a strategic plan for the United States around talent and opportunity that has equity embedded. Like, I'd love that. I just want to manifest that existing, like there was an adult in charge of, and that it gives us a North Star around degrees in the face of AI, or what and, I think what you and I talked about this, that I think that, especially as the AI conversation evolves, I think that people who are our alumni are a whole new market who need to be served, because they all need the AI hat. What is the AI hat? It is my modified skill and technique and expertise to whatever degree I already had, there are going to be ways that different disciplines change. And we should be in real time bundling and packaging and figuring out what those are, because every one of our alums is going to need it to adapt to the workforce needs in the face of in the future of AI. And like, that's a whole thing you could offer. That's a whole separate, and when we think about workforce needs and things like that, like, I just think that the demonstrating curiosity, listening, and not just overwhelming the person with a list of great things that we do. People are looking for higher ed to say, fair point on this one issue. Yeah, we actually screwed up on this one thing. And it doesn't need to be like, so for instance, on the student loan stuff, like I stay away from it, but in general, I think it's easy to say we're not a monolith. And there are some institutions who have taken real advantage of people, and that was wrong. And in fact, like those are not us, but like, I just want to be clear, like, yes, there should be forgiveness on these things. When we're talking about for-profit colleges, like there are some very clear black and white cases where it's like, I'm not saying, it costs money to educate a person. What we do is changes people's lives. It's worth it. It's the best money I've ever spent. But in this thing over here, yeah, fair point. Like the people are looking for a response and not just like a straight up no, because it makes it sound like we're not listening and we're not curious. And so I think on the accountability stuff, like, I think we're more than accountable, but we do need like synthesis, listening, reflection, and conversational communication instead of condescending, talk down to you, and I'm smarter than you, and you don't get it because it doesn't pass the vibe check.
Yep, it doesn't meet the moment either. Yeah, it is. There's so much. As I was saying to this group yesterday, there are critiques that are unfair, and I'm not suggesting that. I think there is the point you made about sort of listening does not mean agreeing, but it is. It is the dismissing is just damaging, and it's got to be done differently, and it is really tricky because it doesn't take, as we saw from this week's hearings, people paint with a very broad brush, and but the perception that higher ed is arrogant affects every single person who works in the industry and every single institution. And we're not very good at nuance. We're not very good at separating, and that's where the sort of collective really becomes important.
I will. One, the Ivy League does not represent higher ed. It has an outsized amount of attention, and that bothers me and bums me out, and it irks me quite often. But this is a case of like, this does not speak for higher ed, and I would love that nuance to be understood, and I know it won't. But I will just say to end on a positive note that this stuff that I'm talking about, the fact that I can talk about in the podcast, like we talk about these things, we're thinking about this though, and as a collective. So there is hope. We're not the only ones. I think that institutions, I sent my newsletter out about this where I was basically saying like, we're conflating two separate things. Like there's feedback that is really telling us that the public wants something different. And like we're taking it as an attack, and like we should actually, listen. And I got a lot of responses back from a lot of different institutions who were like, yep, I agree. And in fact, I'm seeing it this way, and they shared things they were doing. So I feel like there are hotspots of promise and places where these conversations are happening, and people who care about these things and who see things from a way that is responsive to this moment. And I think, especially as my institutions, and we'll talk about this in the next episode, we're rounding the bases on year 10. Our interest is not just in producing a new goal that is exactly like our last one in terms of, thousands more degrees. We're really wanting to be responsive to the needs of this moment. And so I'm spending a lot of time being reflective and listening about what does it mean if the American dream really is a reality for any person? What would it look like? What data do we need to be looking at? What, populations do we need to be serving better? And so we're not the only ones, but I will say there is a lot of reflection right now, and people are synthesizing past work, past lessons to come up with a new response. I don't think that we're going to feel this way about this feedback for a lot longer. I think you'll still always see some institutions that don't perhaps carry that baton, but there are going to be the leadership we're looking for is here, and the opportunity and the leaders and the collective kind of voice. It exists, and it's not just in where I work. There's a lot of reasons to be very hopeful about the future. So
100%. And that's the thing. And I'm the higher ed is up to, can do what people are asking for. It just will require continued adaptation. And that's the thing. I think we've beaten this pretty to a bloody pulp at this point. But
no, I think it's good.
It's the perception of not listening, and it's the I don't think people are saying you're crap. They're saying you're not giving us what everything we need today, and so I do think that higher ed absolutely has the ability to respond and is going to remain the primary way that most people develop develop their careers and figure out how to live their lives. Like, it's going, but it's again, it just doesn't mean that they can't be doing it better, and that's where we are.
No, totally. So if you're at home, I hope that you have appreciated that this is just us reflecting on what we're seeing broadly, but that there is, like I said, I hope there's a hopefulness. The fact that we're having conversations like this out and it's not just like us stewing silently is great. And I love using your journalist perspective, because you really are looking kind of super broadly. And I get to own my bias. Big fan. Like, if I need to purchase a foam number 1 finger, and I could just hold it up, because I really, in my mind, I feel like I have that quite a bit. So anyway, for higher ed in general, what you do matters. And I think that we're about to have a moment where we're going to speak differently, and the public is likely going to be, I hope, responsive. So hope you have a wonderful week. It's been a great chance to synthesize where we're at today. And Doug, as always, you're an excellent co-host. I'll see you soon.
Good seeing you.